Audrey.
Howdy, y'all. Thanks you guys for being here. I'm really glad you can make it. So I want to start out by asking y'all a question, and it's pretty simple. By a show of hands, how many of you have one show that you just really, really love to watch? Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I completely understand. So while most of us may think that we just like to watch these shows because they're funny or entertaining, I know at least for me, I like to watch shows because it allows me to, if you will, escape from my life for a little bit. So instead of thinking about my problems and my stresses that I have going on, I get to invest in these other characters' lives. And now we might think of that as a modern notion with like Netflix and Hulu and Redbox and all those modern TV apps that we have now. But the medievals actually felt like that also when they would go to see performances of plays like what Shakespeare did. So I will delve into their thought process of going into plays a little later, but right now let's get a little background on Shakespeare, who they indeed love to watch. So Shakespeare was born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, England. He was the son of a guildsman and was educated at the local school called the King's School. However, he did not attend university and instead got married to Anne Hathaway at 18. On the theatrical side of things, by 1590 he managed and performed in a very well-known acting company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. When James I became king, they changed the name to the King's Men. By 1597, we know that he had written 15 out of his 38 plays, and in 1599, he built the famous Globe Theatre with his business partners. And, sorry, that's supposed to be up. That is his house in Stratford, and that is a sketch of the Globe Theatre from 1647, and that is, however, it had already been rebuilt a couple of times by then due to a fire and things of that sort, but that is what most of us think of when we think of the Globe Theatre. Now, just for some historical context about the time that Shakespeare lived in, Shakespeare lived in what was called the Golden Era, and Elizabeth I ruled during the first part of the Golden Age. That is a painting of her from 1575, and James I ruled during the second half of the Golden Age. It was called the Golden Age because it preceded but also followed a very tumultuous time in English history. Now, although it was a fairly peaceful time, there was still some squabbles, if you will, going on in the English world. One of those major squabbles was about the religious tension, because the Protestants and the Lutherans and the Catholics were all kind of rivalries in this new Reformation that was still going on in England during that time. Interestingly, there was even some specific religious tension in the boundaries of theater itself, because the church put on their own plays, but secular plays by Shakespeare were much more common and the people enjoyed them more. The church did not appreciate this rivalry, and they probably would have abolished play acting as a whole if it weren't for the theater's noble patrons. Culturally, some things going on during Shakespeare's era. Like I said, since it was the Golden Age, it was peaceful, so wages were high and many different social classes were able to own land and gain wealth. And this newfound wealth turned into a more urban culture. This is Peter Ayerston's depiction of urban culture from a painting in 1550. And that urban culture produced a highly profitable atmosphere for producing the arts, and during this time, the value of musical skill greatly increased. Now, plays soon became a common thing for people to go to, and playhouses saw about 120,000 people per week. Now, These people who attended these plays were every kind of people you can imagine, from groundlings to nobles. There's every different kind of trade and laborer there. They were very different from the modern perception of going to a play. We think of we're going to be very quiet and proper and wear nice clothes and just sit and enjoy the show. Not so for them. They went all the time. It was a common thing. And they would often buy beer and sing with the actors. So it was a boisterous and interactive audience. And like I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, they would also go so frequently to escape the stresses of life. And this is a depiction of an audience watching a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And now some of the social impacts of Shakespeare. He greatly impacted our society and his society. One of the ways that we mostly think of that is in how he radically transformed the English language. He added roughly 1,700 words to our language, which is pretty crazy, and his work is still vastly studied and performed throughout the country. This is a picture from Shakespeare in the Park in New York. There are many different festivals and Shakespeare's in the park throughout the country. It's really amazing. And since he was called the Bard of Avon, the obsession with studying his writing is called bardolatry. Now, there were several things that made his works so memorable, and first it was the literary devices he used. He often wrote in iambic pentameter, but also frequently deviated to prose, which is the normal way we speak. He did not use a specific rhyme, and he wrote in early modern English. Interestingly, we usually think of him as writing in very archaic language compared to what we have now, but it is actually extremely similar to our modern English. What also made his works memorable are what I like to call his tricks that he used in his writing. Now, all of his works, except for 3, I believe, were rewritten from other stories. For instance, this is the cover page of Holinshed's Chronicles, which Shakespeare used to write Macbeth, and he used the plot of these chronicles down to a very, very fine detail when he was writing Macbeth. He also very frequently used plot twists, puns, professional language, slang, and stereotypes. His characters also have significance in his writing because their names had meaning. They were not just chosen at random, and they were relatable. For instance, in Macbeth, as Macbeth sinks into deeper and deeper wickedness, Shakespeare shows that it brings sadness, which we can relate to our own life. Now, following his techniques and tricks as closely as I could, I wrote one act of my own Shakespearean play, and my characters also have significance. So we have Flavian, who's a noble and heroic Briton. His name is from Latin, and it means brave man. Then we have Reed, who's gruff and weathered Irishman, and his name is from Scottish. It means ruddy complexion. And then we have Duffy, who's a young Scotsman. His name is from Gaelic, and it means black one of peace. So now I'd like